Great. All right, so I'm going to talk around keys, sort of trends in the public sector that I'm seeing. You know, as being the Chief Strategist for Canada, I work with all the major public sector entities within Canada, from municipal to cities to the feds to the provinces across the country. And if you forgive me, I'm going to read to start off the presentation today, and then I'll speak to the slides through my presentation. I want to thank you for coming today. You know, I've been in this business for over 25 years, a former global CTO, physicist before that, and I've never seen this amount of unprecedented innovation happening in all areas of IT. Not only the technology and process, but we're fundamentally changing the way we structure IT organizations, away from that sort of historical assembly line approach to how you innovate through all the technology silos that we have. We're changing that model that was basically derived during the Industrial Revolution. And now we're focused on building sort of these teams, networks of teams, smaller teams that are generative kind of culture, sharing ideas, bringing problems to the forefront, and being very collaborative and sort of a small team structures. So the thesis of my keynote today is to share how technology and new approaches to IT can fundamentally change the role of government in its services relationship to the constituency. And this is actually beginning to happen here in the province of BC. I'm also going to share some public sector trends in this public sector space, including some modern innovation approaches, as well a number of our speakers today. And as I said before, I'm focused on the public sector, not just only within Canada, but I work with my peers throughout the world, including the UK government, the Australian government, as well as Singapore and New Zealand as an example. They're sort of adopting this new sort of approach to how to do a government. Now, I'm quite proud. I'm very proud. I think Red Hat Canada and Red Hat in general is very proud of what's been happening within BC Developers Exchange. I think there's a lot of forward thinking here from a cultural innovation, harnessing the power of open source as an example, as well as technology architecture in terms of how we look at government and how it interacts with the constituency. So today's agenda, I'm going to talk a little bit about the new world of strategy. How strategy is changing. As a strategist, I'll comment on both the private and public sector, what's going on there. I want to spend a little bit of time on government as a platform, government 2.0, open government to a certain degree, and where that's going and where the vision I think is there is going to happen. I think it's starting to happen here within the province of BC. I'll do a brief Red Hat corporate introduction, and then get into digital transformation, DevOps, and sort of modern innovation practices, and that'll take me hopefully to about 9:45 or so. I'm going to go through my slides fairly quickly, but hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end. I guess last May, Jim Whitehurst, who is the CEO of Red Hat and a former consultant, a former strategist with Boston Consulting Group, he went up on stage and made a very bold statement. He said, "Planning is dead." And he basically also said, you know, as we know it, things have changed. Things are moving so fast that it's very hard to predict what the future is going to look like in 2 to 3, 4 or 5 years. Establish a vision, establish a plan, and execute that plan to go to that endpoint. By the time you get there, things have changed so drastically. And I think that's true within the government as well. This was also sort of backed by IDC when they made their predictions in December of last year around this new architecture for IT, this new idea or concept or notion of a digital transformation platform, this centralized platform around how we innovate. Instead of focusing our time on planning and execution of these detailed plans, it's about building a very adaptive platform to allow you to innovate on the fly very quickly. Some of the core tenets of what this platform looks like, you know, there's an intelligent core that allows developers to very quickly write bespoke or custom applications. There's a lot of integration, and a lot of the integrations nowadays we talk around an API-first approach. APIs are becoming that mechanism that allow applications and services to communicate with each other. So this intelligent digital transformation platform is API-focused and enabled. It's consuming data from outside the organization and combining it with data within the organization and combining that with artificial intelligence and machine learning to make very data-driven based decisions in the organization. And it's really focused on creating this ecosystem. In the public sector context, I would say an ecosystem marketplace or a bazaar that sits on top of government that is basically built and designed and innovated through third parties like nonprofits, individual constituents within the area, as well as looking at private organizations building and taking the value and the data that they can consume from government and drive it to the market. There's all kinds of examples of that, GPS data for mapping, and other examples where the private community has been taking data from government to derive value. So basically IDC said that by 2020, 60% of large enterprise organizations will have this centralized kind of digital transformation platform in place. And part of that role is Red Hat supplying things like OpenShift as that intelligent core for how you innovate, wrapping it with JBoss Catalog, which is our middleware product sets that Bhaskar will be talking about in a minute. Highly automated systems throughout the entire platform itself through Ansible, which is becoming the general purpose de facto automation engine within the enterprise. Red Hat Mobile Application Platform, our HMAP, which is on the right-hand side of the slide for mobile-based application innovation. And JBoss 3Scale, which is our API management. These APIs are becoming a product focus or product philosophy applied to them. You know, managing who's accessing them, how you scale them, and treating them like a product, going through versions and control, et cetera. So those are some of the major changes we're seeing in the platform. I was part of the ITAC Agile Government for the Feds in October 18th. Corey is one of the keynote speakers of that event as well, who's speaking later. But the CIO of Canada, Alex Benet, hosted this event trying to look at agile government. And they say, what, imitation's the greatest form of flattery? Well, they actually took the BC Dev Exchange construct, the GitHub website, and actually made a copy of that for the federal government to increase agile procurement and agile-based government practices. So, and BC Developers Exchange was highlighted numerous times through that event. So you guys are making waves at the federal level. So government as a platform, I think Tim O'Reilly, who is famously known for the O'Reilly books, you know, the technology books that maybe your technologists have read or you've read yourself, came up with this term, I guess, government as a platform. It's the idea of government providing this platform that supplies data, it's the open data initiatives I think we're all familiar with, but also a platform to innovate with the participants, the constituency on top of that platform. So taking the data are actually actively participating in this platform to derive functionality for the government that the other constituents believe. You know, if we look at government, fundamentally, if we strip it down to what it really is, it's collective civic action, a group of people working together to solve problems better than doing on an individual basis. And the idea is to get full participation of the constituents, the nonprofits, the private, and the individuals within the constituency to work with government to solve problems. I think with the advent of Web 2.0 and the internet, government as a platform has become an actual realization. I guess the traditional style, if you will, of government has been the vendor machine model, I think coined by Donald Kettle, an IBMer, in around 2009. He said basically there's a bunch of suppliers that work with the government, put it into a vending machine, and the constituents consume those services based on what the government feels best. There's not a lot of active participation in the derivation of the government services being provided. This government as a platform, as I said before, there's a couple of books that talked around the government as a platform by Tim O'Reilly and the Open Government, which is based around collaboration, transparency, and the participation in practice. I think if you look at the BC Developers Exchange and its ability to open up the government services that you want to digitize and open it up to the public to actually innovate, cut code, and submit that to the BC Dev Exchange, I think is a wonderful example of this government as a platform in practice. And I want to walk through sort of, you know, if we look at government as a platform, how does technology change the mechanics of government services, highlighting some of the things we're starting to see within the BC Gov. If you look at the Westminster style of government, you have the various ministries or silos that you see on the right-hand side of the slide. You have citizens consuming those government services, and each ministry is responsible for their own set of government services. So some of them will be doing tax, you may have licenses, could be environment assessments, could be natural resources, etc. Each one of these, from an IT perspective, you can break down on a people, process, and technology, as we're all familiar with. And if you sort of break down and pull one of those silos, one of those ministries to the side, the levers and dials are the way that constituents actually interface to the government, either through forms, or through more and more websites, through mobile-based applications. These are the levers and dials that the constituency are leveraging to consume the services in the way they wish to do so. The machinery at the bottom of this is the infrastructure, the hardware, but also the databases, the applications, that sort of stuff that supports. The middle part, which is the capabilities. Capabilities are that business logic, those bits within the software and the code to support the government services being supplied to the citizens. Now, if you were to break down those capabilities into two areas, you have the specific areas. Those are specific logic and applications that are built for that particular ministry versus common capabilities, if you will. The common capabilities like registering for a government service, or a wizard to use to register with a government service, or identity management. Those are common pieces of functionality that I believe can be used across the various ministries that make up the BC government. It has allowed us to decouple these various layers from the levers down the machinery and allow you to make changes at those other layers, and then ideally without impacting the other layers. And specifically, if you can identify those common areas, and I don't know if Todd's in the room, but Todd has shared various examples where one particular ministry has built a digital service and application like the bus inspection application, and another ministry that you never think could reuse that code within the BC government. And so I think there's lots of opportunity for us collectively to work together to identify those common areas where we can build value, reuse code through the BC Dev Exchange. So by breaking up and decoupling these various areas, we can look at shared benefits around economics, around sharing the platforms to, for example, the levers and dials, common website for common services, obviously look at consolidation of infrastructure in the back end. But I think looking at defining these minimal viable capabilities through a DevOps approach allows organizations to reuse code and to better work together. I do know the bus inspection app that is available in open source, as an example, was downloaded by the province of Ontario, and they're working through reusing it at the province for their bus inspections of the school kids' buses. So that's sort of the overall sort of new approach that we're seeing happening within governments around the world, particularly Australian and New Zealand. If you were to functionally break down this stack and provide a little bit more detail, you'd see the platform on the right-hand side of this slide sort of making up a platform as a service, sort of a bunch of services surrounding that so you can very quickly build up digital applications and built for change, and then application frameworks that sit on top of that. The general trend in the marketplace, developers want to use specific application frameworks depending on the use case or what they're trying to do, and you want to look for a platform to allow those things to happen. I know Todd's been very serious in terms of allowing a lot of application frameworks to be made available to you without taking a standards approach to defining what toolkits you can use, much more of a principle-based approach. This is in principle what you should use. Here's some toolkits that you may use, but it's up to you and give you choice in terms of how you want to develop your digital services. Of course, wrapped around the stack is security and automation and management. Those definitely have to be addressed. The way we look at security, the way we look at compliance, the way we look at audit, the way we look at how we automate things are changing very rapidly. We have to break down fundamentally why we do those things, and maybe there's a better way to do it. If you were to take the traditional approach to how you do security in a DevOps or innovation environment, it's going to break down. There are tools to help with that, different approaches, different philosophies that you need to address. And from a Red Hat perspective, we play at the PaaS platform, that central platform for innovation. That's OpenShift, RHEL, or Red Hat Enterprise Linux, as the operating system. The operating system went from being somewhat strategic like 10, 15 years ago to becoming a commodity, but it's sort of re-risen out of the ranks to be a very strategic asset because a lot of the advanced functionalities you get in the upper layers of the platform are actually constructions or constructs that occur within the operating system itself. And of course, XPaaS, in our case, we're talking Red Hat Mobile Application Platform, JBoss EAP, which is our enterprise application platform, our Java server is an example, and there's a whole series of products that Vasco will be talking about. But if you have developers that want to engage and build new digital services a certain way, the application frameworks, you have to have flexibility there because there is a lot of specialization happening to meet the sort of applications that you see at the top of the slide, those digital services being consumed by the constituents. And I tried to encapsulate what's going on here from an open government as a platform and tie it back to the BC Dev Exchange. At the bottom of the slide, you can see sort of this PaaS, this next generation PaaS, OpenShift or container management platform, building applications through a DevOps approach. APIs are becoming the de facto standard for integration moving forward, both within the inter-application communication as well as to the marketplace at the top of the slide. This is where the private enterprise, the constituents, the individuals are building digital applications on top of the services that the government is providing. On the right-hand side, I think some of the forward thinking that you've had in the province of BC is around leveraging and harnessing open source as the new way of innovating, right? Going to the communities, going to individual developers to actually build code and submit those code snippets to the province that will eventually turn into business applications or digital services within the platform. And actually releasing that source code back into the community for continued innovation. There are over 33 million people in the open source community worldwide. The diversity and the capacity of that community, and its alignment with open government in general, its values and principles, I think is an excellent way to harness innovation that's happening in the open source world. I know Todd shared a couple examples of actual individuals who stepped up and correlated data between a schema that was built by the province of BC with schemas that were offered through Stats Canada and the federal agencies, and over a weekend fixed a broken part, connecting those two together. So a quick little anecdote around how open source can help with innovation. But this is really beyond technology. Technology, I think, quite honestly, is the easy part if we look at how we're changing how we innovate. Next generation architectures, I'll get into in a minute, but really it's around DevOps and cultural changes. And I think the BC Dev Exchange, we have our innovation labs within Red Hat, is an excellent way of helping convert how you innovate today to a new sort of strategy. In the DevOps world, we're kind of moving away from the craft work, the workshop, the specific unique work, and building out a factory, typically is on a cloud platform, platform as a service, and manufacturing, which is kind of the DevOps approach to very quickly building up digital service. We want to industrialize this. It's highly automated. It's API-driven and data-driven. In combination of DevOps and cloud, you can see that the deployment quality is typically 63% increase. It's faster release frequency, very fast release frequency. I know TELUS, for example, does 500 deploys to production a day for the consumer-based website. And they achieve some of these quality numbers while doing so. And a 61% improvement in process visibility. So within Red Hat, we kind of live the Red Hat lives the DevOps kind of culture. We are a global organization, over 2.4 billion in revenues. Likely going to be over 3 billion in revenues. I'm being videotaped, so I'm going to be careful about forward-leaning statements. But we'll likely be over 3 billion this year. Global organization, and you can see we have a vast portfolio of products. Everything we do is open source. That is a core principle of what we do. If we innovate, we will release that code back to the community. And we work with the community strongly for all these products that you see here. In fact, when we buy a company that's private, like Feed Henry was the company that eventually turned into our Red Hat mobile application platform. We took the source code, we scrubbed it, and re-released it to the community. We just did so as well with Ansible, which is the automation engine we bring to market. You can actually download all of our products through the open source community. And I think if you look at a lot of government entities, they're starting to look at what's available in the open source community to change my thinking and how I innovate and how I approach to doing things. And I think a prime example was the BC Dev Exchange downloading OpenShift Origin, which is our open source version of our product that you can download and use to test out concepts and innovations. And then when they look to actually do production-based applications, look to acquire the OpenShift product from us for their platform. Basically, in the open source community, there's over 1 million projects. There's probably 1.5 million projects. We help curate, combine projects together to form communities. Those are sort of the, see if I get the laser pointer to work here. These communities here and over here. Sort of multiple projects together. I think we all know about Linux. This is Fedora is the upstream community for our Red Hat Enterprise Linux product. And I'll call out maybe one other product, OpenShift Origin, which is used, which becomes OpenShift container management platform. So we help curate that, and we help drive in the communities that innovation. And you're welcome to innovate in those communities as well. I know when we built our secure version of Enterprise Linux called SE Linux, we worked with the NSA in the US to build a secure version of that platform, and that's become our SE Linux platform that we sell to the marketplace. Open source, cloud equals DevOps. I think open source, if you were to look at the toolkit that most large enterprises use, there is a huge amount of DevOps kind of tooling to support a DevOps culture and practice. And these are some examples that are available today. If you're a leader in the room and you're leading your teams, you need to embrace change. I think if you look at a mindset, a culture, technology, and process, the latter two you need to work on. But culture and creating a progenitive kind of culture, a culture of sharing and collaboration, going away from a bureaucratic culture is one of the major things that you need to worry about. And there's a whole series of best practices that have how to do that, and I believe the BC Developers Exchange has adopted a lot of those practices to help you go through that process. I was expecting now animation here, but in this slide, I'm going to talk about sort of the three core main principles of DevOps. This is Gene Kim on the right-hand side of myself. Gene Kim, Patrick Dubois, who's one of the forefathers of DevOps and actually coined the term DevOps movement. These guys put together a how-to book. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of it today, but that is an excellent reference book, DevOps How-To by Gene Kim, on how to approach DevOps from a tooling, best practice, culture, technology, process perspective. So the three main core tenets of DevOps. The first one at the top of the slide, from development to operations, is fast flow. You want fast flow. That was easy for me to say. Fast flow. How do you do that? There's various sub-principles that follow up underneath that to allow you to do that. Small batch sizes, we call in the industry. Small changes of code that go right to production right away through a highly automated process. You're bringing together multidisciplinary teams together into one smaller team. So you may take someone from development to test, to UAT, to operations into one smaller team and make them a team that helps push that production change from development to operations. You need to have a platform to enable that automation. It's all about fast flow. You're trying to break down handoffs. Handoffs are the areas that slow everything up. That's why you're combining these cross-functional, multi-trained teams together into one team. You want to be able to create and remove those handoffs. And so that you end up creating teams, networks of teams within your organization to support that. The second principle, the middle sort of principle in this slide, is around the idea of active feedback. A lot of the DevOps movement came out of the lean manufacturing processes in the 80s that Toyota and other automotive manufacturing processes adopted. In Toyota, they have a cord that runs along the entire assembly line. And the reason that cord exists, the end-on cord, is if there's an issue at any station along that assembly line, the people at that station are encouraged to pull the cord to stop the assembly line. And they actually pull that. And you know how many times a day that gets pulled in a typical Toyota assembly line? 3,000 times a day, which is very counterintuitive. The point of that is every time there's an issue, missing a part or it wasn't manufactured correctly up the line, you stop everything, everybody gets together, learns how to fix it, Scrum, if you will, fix it, expand the learnings across the entire assembly line to prevent it in the future, and then the assembly line continues. I kind of cheated. I know there's 3,000 times it stops per day. If it lasts more than typically 2 minutes, then they actually stop the movement of the car through the assembly line, as an example. So ongoing, constant learning all the time. And the last major principle is around learning, continually learning and active experimentation with the actual applications and instrumentation. So you're always constantly learning from and spreading it globally across the entire assembly line. So most organizations start with Agile Development at the bottom of this slide. They go to Scrum-based, Agile-based development. We started doing Scrums Agile-based development in 2003 with the Agile Manifesto. Then we looked at continuous integration. We're constantly, every day, taking the code that's being written by the developers, integrating it with the broader spectrum of applications and middleware, and making sure it works and do the testing. Continuous delivery is moving that application code through the pipeline to the production. And once you get to a point where you can do sort of these 3 morning tenets, then you're in a DevOps kind of practice. So if we look at Gartner and talking about bimodal IT, we still have a lot of applications, legacy applications in our environment. But we're also building net new applications. And how do you address keeping the lights on as well as handling these net new cloud-native applications? I think traditionally we had waterfall processes, we had monolithic applications, we packaged things on physical servers, and we had application infrastructure. I think a lot of governments across the world are the middle stage, current. They started to do with some agile. They have N-tier application, monolithic applications running on virtual machines or virtual servers, and it may be hosted by an external party. But today we're seeing the more progressive organizations creating that group off to the side that specializes in DevOps, building microservices-based applications. So breaking down that big monolithic application into decomposable services that together form the application, but interface with each other to provide the service to the end user. Containers and containerization, I believe, have solved the problem of predictably moving code or applications, whether it's through an assembly line from development to production, or whether you want to host them on public clouds or private clouds within the environment. You can predictably containerize the application, package it up, and send it through that stream. And sort of the next generation platforms as a service, including OpenShift, are really container management platforms that support sort of that DevOps and microservices approach to building applications. And lastly, cloud for speed and agility. So over the years, we've built applications based on these core principles. The new ones around making change very rapidly and sharing data. I guess my metaphor is around food, if you will. The software architecture in the 90s, we had spaghetti, right? We had applications that were built, they talked to each other, they're very tightly coupled. In 2000s, we built this layered approach, this lasagna approach to software development. And this is otherwise known as the monolith. So you have the N-tier application, the web services, the application, the data layer. And now we're getting to the point where the raviolis, right? We have different types of ravioli. We've got meat ravioli, we've got cheese ravioli, but they all work together nicely in a microservices kind of architecture and actually is a pleasing taste when you do that. So that's typically where we're going today, cloud-native microservices-based applications. We're keeping the lights on. I think the opportunity, looking at your legacy workloads, there is an opportunity to address those using the next generation architectures and cloud platforms, but you want to leverage those assets that you have today. Modernizing traditional apps, I think there's opportunities there, and I'll get into that in a moment, but as well as developing contemporary applications, cloud-native applications, using a PaaS and possibly infrastructure as a service for cloud. So this centralized platform I talked about at the beginning sort of is that middle ground that helps you look at your traditional and your linear-based legacy applications and your contemporary net new cloud-native applications. And I think that centralized platform can handle both, and that's certainly one of the core principles when we design OpenShift to have that. So typically what we see is sort of this best practice within many organizations, private and public. Start out by looking at developing contemporary applications. That's step one. And I think we've done, 20 applications within BC Dev Exchange as an example in production, doing that. How do we understand that? How do we look at Agile? How do we reorganize ourselves and go through that process of developing a minimal viable product versus a traditional waterfall? Then looking at certain modernized traditional mode applications, maybe wrap those legacy applications with APIs. As I said before, APIs are becoming a very critical aspect of how we do modern day architecture. And then we try to bridge the two through APIs. If you look at what TELUS did with their commercial-based site, their consumer-based site, anything you interact with TELUS from a consumer perspective goes through the site. They build a net new OpenShift platform on Amazon, all brand new functionality, cloud-based native applications, and used API and integration to all their back-end legacy systems that they currently have, and they basically turn off features and functions of the old legacy and bring them to the net new, sort of following this methodology, if you will, at scale. And again, they do about 500 deploys to production today, a day. So a production change to code, a change to a particular service, et cetera. I also think we need to rethink about integration. API approach first. I think Jeff Bezos, who's the co-founder of, or founder of Amazon, said he had a Jeff Bezos moment where he said, you know, if any group within this organization is going to build an application, they need to expose an API that's properly managed as a product so other groups within the organization can consume those services and reuse functionality. Containers, looking at containerizing the integration as well. Not just look at containerization applications and wrapping applications in container, but look at the integration layer as a container platform as well. And then distributed integration. We believe strongly at Red Hat that we need to distribute the integration points, tools, applications. As we start to create microservices that are basically decomposing services of the application and having them reside in different spots, you need to move the integration points with those microservices and embed it within the microservice applications themselves. So to close up, before I ask Vasco to come on stage, you might want to get a lapel before you come on, or you want to talk from the... No, I just go grab a lapel before you come up on stage. When we look at this core platform that I talked about through my talk, you want to allow developers a choice of framework, whether it's Node.js, whether it's Java, whether it's Spring Boot. You need a very series of application frameworks available to the organization, to the developers to build their application. Cloud-like attributes, I would say that OpenShift is kind of that stepping stone to eventual multi-cloud-based architecture. It's a good way to get to understand the features and functions on an elastic kind of cloud before you look at placing workloads in the public cloud environment. The platform has to be highly automated, enabling a DevSecOps approach to innovation. I know I didn't talk a lot about security, but I think most DevOps teams will have a security member within that team and will automate the security-based processes around the promotion of code to production. In an automated fashion, you'll be handling issues with regards to security on an exception basis, as opposed to doing manual configurations and bringing security in late in the process. Containers is a key way to move software reliably. I've talked about that. There is an opportunity to support greenfield and brownfield-based legacy applications. There's going to be talks talking around brownfield later on this morning. And we're going to support modern-based application architectures. You need to have a microservices architecture. You can think of the microservice architecture, those decomposable services. In some instances, you may have various DevOps teams going to each one of those microservices and allowing those DevOps teams to consume those services from their counterparts on an ongoing basis. APIs I've talked about, and then open source and open standards. These are some of the core platform positioning we feel that you need for this new way of how we architect IT. And with that, I'm going to thank you.